Folklore doesn't always revolve around crime, a ghost, or a cryptid. Sometimes the talk of the town is a roadside attraction, a strange conspiracy, or perhaps even a guy that's known to go around town asking for money for a can of Fix-A-Flat. What I'm trying to say is ghosts and ghouls don't deserve all the credit, and my favorite urban legends aren't scary at all. That's why today I'm devoting this video to local folklore surrounding places and things that are just downright unusual in Massachusetts. Now, before we get started, I just want to say thank you for tuning in and let you know that if you want to see my little channel continue to grow, the best possible thing you can do for me is subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment, and most importantly, watch until the end. This will never cost you a dime, and it's a quick way to say, hey YouTube, this guy's alright. With this in mind, come with me today and let's see what Massachusetts has in store in the weird department. For anyone who's spent enough time in downtown Boston, there's a unique local celebrity you're almost certain to encounter. One who's been crafting his story with finesse for nearly 3 decades. Known around town as the Fix-A-Flat scammer, I'm not going to say his real name, this not-so-gentlemanly gentleman is a tall, well-dressed black male with a smooth voice and an even smoother sales pitch. He'll spot you on the street and he'll tell you he had the misfortune of a flat tire, and he's a few bucks short of grabbing a can of Fix-A-Flat to get home. His exact dollar request may vary. Sometimes it's $12, sometimes as much as $80, though in my case I was lucky enough to only be quoted $15. Perhaps I didn't look too rich. I was a grad student after all. Now, if you offer to buy the Fix-A-Flat yourself, he will graciously decline, conveniently forgetting where the nearest auto shop is. Should you tell him you're out of cash though, he's always keenly aware of where the nearest ATM is. Occasionally, he'll even throw in a sob story about a sick son waiting to be picked up at a hospital or waiting in his car. To really sell it, he sometimes produces a business card too with a fake name and number, promising to pay you back just a phone call away. He's gotten creative over the years too. These days, sometimes he moves on from the Fix-A-Flat cans, and sometimes it's said on Boston's subreddit that he's known to march into a restaurant demanding reimbursement for a dry cleaning bill he claimed was owed to him for a stain on his shirt caused by their food. On one occasion, it's said he nearly walked away with the cash until a manager asked for his contact info, prompting him to storm off in a huff. Now, be careful with this individual. It's said that when he's confronted about his act, things can take a turn. He's known for putting on a dramatic scene at times, and sometimes even going as far as to verbally assault individuals that find him out or get in the way of his scam. Perhaps this short temper is what got him arrested for assault and battery back in 2010. Now, the locals of Boston swear he's been on this Fix-A-Flat crusade since the 90s, and who knows, maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe this poor man has been cruising the streets of Boston since the 90s with a stain on his shirt, looking for just those few dollars for a can of Fix-A-Flat to patch his tire and get his son home. His son, likely parked in a back bay parking spot, is now 40 years old, looking out into the city, wondering when his devoted father will return. Maybe we've all been misinterpreting this situation all along. Maybe the can of Fix-A-Flat wasn't some scam. Maybe it was the friends we made along the way. Okay, sorry, that's probably the cheesiest joke on this channel, but I had to. The Old Boston Garden, built in 1928 by the same man behind New York's Madison Square Garden, was Boston's heart of sports and spectacle for years. Perched above North Station, it hosted the Celtics, the Bruins, and even the occasional circus. And it was in 1937, during one such circus, that the garden's strangest saga unfolded. 11 monkeys slipped free from their handlers, scattering across the rafters, while 2 of these monkeys were quickly lured out with bananas and recaptured. Only after taking a bite out of an unlucky employee, the other 9 simply vanished, and their escape made headlines and thrilled fans, with Celtics Hall of Famer Tommy Heinsohn later commenting that he loved the idea of a phantom monkey haunting the garden, living on crumbs left behind by fans. For 60 years, the story remained a curious urban legend, until the garden's demolition in 1998, that is. As the demolition crews worked to tear down the historic site, rumors began to circulate that workers had discovered something peculiar high above the court center: a mummified monkey lodged between a roof panel and a steel truss. 5 workers independently claimed to have seen it. The hapless monkey seemed to have wandered into a dead end, gotten trapped, and eventually succumbed to the elements, remaining hidden in the garden's dark recesses for decades. Now, rather than remove it, the wreckers adopted the poor creature as an unofficial mascot for the wrecking crew. They'd stash it in electrical boxes, send it up and down in rooftop baskets, and even offered it to Channel 7 News for a story, though the anchor thought it was a prank, so he declined. The workers even claimed to keep the monkey on site for good luck, though some felt it carried a curse, causing small accidents and mishaps whenever they moved it. Eventually, one of the wreckers involved in this whole saga actually took the monkey home, where a string of misfortunes, including accidents in his car and minor injuries, haunted him until he returned it to the worksite. Now, these rumors were considered hearsay, for decades really. People thought there was no monkey in the Boston Garden, and this was all just a bunch of hooey. That is until years later, when photos of the mummified monkey surfaced, confirming the story at last. And you're probably asking yourself, well, if there are photos of the monkey, what happened to the monkey itself? Well, when the garden was finally raised, the wrecker that was messing around with the monkey started taking the remains with him to other demolition jobs, claiming it as a bizarre keepsake. The monkey's remains eventually apparently became fodder for even more misfortune, from traffic collisions on the way to other job sites to on-site injuries at those job sites. They basically just claimed that there was a curse surrounding the mummified monkey. Now, eventually, nature did take its toll on the monkey, and apparently while it was sitting in the man's basement, some animals got to it, and these days, only the monkey's mummified head remains. As far as I'm aware, the last time it was talked about, it was in the man's basement, and this was in 2015. When he was interviewed, he also hinted at potentially just burying his unusual companion, or maybe donating it to the new TD Garden. That is, if TD Garden wants a mummified monkey head from the old Boston Garden. That would be kind of a weird thing to show, but hey, maybe they've done it. Who knows? Now, this scene opens in July of 1969 as Ted Kennedy, senator, seasoned sailor, and unlucky member of the Kennedy dynasty, heads out to the Cape for a weekend of yacht racing at the Edgartown Regatta. Kennedy, along with his cousin Joseph Gargan, rented a secluded little cottage on Chappaquiddick Island, reachable only by ferry. And the reason for their visit? A boiler room girls' reunion for women who'd worked on his brother Robert's presidential campaign. The guest list included 6 single women in their 20s, plus 8 married men. Wives were notably uninvited to this party. I'm going to keep myself quiet because none of the other videos I was watching on YouTube really speculated on that point, so who knows, maybe they got threatened, but let's just say the optics weren't ideal, and I'll leave it at that. Now, fast forward 3 hours into the cookout, and Mary Jo Kopechny, one of the former campaign staffers, asked Ted to give her a ride back to her hotel in Katama. Now, despite Ted not usually driving, the chauffeur gave him the keys, and Ted took the wheel, and off they went, only for Ted to make a wrong turn onto Dyke Road and onto the infamous one-lane bridge. And moments later, the car veered off of the bridge into a place called Puka Pond. Now, Kennedy himself was able to swim free of the car, but Mary Jo remained trapped. Ted allegedly tried several times to dive down to the car and free her, but he failed at that multiple times, and he opted for a solution that you'd probably find a bit amazing. He headed back to the cottage, he told a few friends what happened, and then he passed out in the back of another car that wasn't underwater. Now, the 2 individuals that were told about the crash went back to the car's wreckage and tried to dive down and save Mary Jo, who, hint hint, was probably still alive at this point, but they were unable to get her out. By dawn, the plot thickened. Ted ended up missing the ferries back to Edgartown, so he just swam the 500-foot channel instead, making it back to his hotel room super late and going to bed, leaving the other 2 to drive home quietly at around 2 a.m., telling nobody else at the party what had transpired. Now, there's also another side to this tale. A local deputy sheriff reportedly spotted a similar car to that of Ted Kennedy's, with a woman inside of it at around 12:40 a.m., which is about an hour after Ted reportedly left the cottage to drive Mary Jo to the ferry. And adding to the subtle revelry, he saw 3 guests from the party dancing a conga line down the street. It wasn't until around 8 a.m. that 2 individuals going out to fish actually noticed Ted's car submerged in the pond and sounded the alarm. Now, quickly after this, authorities arrived at the car and did their best to free Mary Jo, but clearly it was too late, seeing as it had been like a solid 8 hours at this point. Ted, on the other hand, understandably maybe, was calling everyone who could help him. Lawyers, friends, and even his brother-in-law, but not the police. Eventually, though, Ted decided to make his way to the police station at 9:50 a.m., where he met the local police chief, who found himself shocked to learn that Ted had been the driver of the car they found in the pond, and somehow hadn't mentioned it at all until then to police. The statement Ted eventually provided was an exercise in selective memory, explaining he'd swum down repeatedly to save Mary Jo, but in shock went back to his hotel room without notifying anybody. Naturally, the local medical examiner was unavailable this day too, so the associate medical examiner handled it, quickly ruling Mary Jo's death an accidental drowning. Now, the full-time examiner strongly disagreed, suggesting that perhaps an autopsy would have been wise, but to add one last twist, the man who actually retrieved Mary Jo's body insisted that instead of passing away from drowning, she died from suffocation, not drowning, and she might have even survived if a timely rescue had been attempted. The whole incident stands as one of the murkiest chapters in the Kennedy legacy, with Ted casually bouncing back into daily life, chatting it up with the race winners the next day after the wreck, as if Chappaquiddick was just a minor misstep on the way back to Edgartown. Now, after the tragic events at Chappaquiddick, Ted Kennedy found himself engulfed in a whirlwind of high-profile advisors, from McNamara to Kennedy family fixer Stephen Smith. The consensus was kind of grim for him. Politically, Chappaquiddick had effectively ended Kennedy's chances for a 1972 presidential run. Aware of the scandal's gravity, Smith and the rest focused their efforts on protecting Kennedy from criminal charges. At his court hearing on July 25th, Kennedy pled guilty to leaving the scene of an accident, receiving a light sentence because of it, and 2 months in jail suspended thanks to his character and unblemished record. Ironically, records of reckless driving from his younger days remained unknown to the judge, adding another layer of controversy to an already scandal-laden case. Kennedy ended up addressing the nation in a televised statement, penned by his advisor, Ted Sorensen, expressing confusion and regret over his actions at the crash. He admitted to having suffered shock and alluded to a curse on the Kennedy family, finally appealing to Massachusetts residents to decide themselves if he should resign. Critics lambasted his speech as melodramatic, even citing comparisons to Nixon's Checkers speech. Yet, despite widespread public backlash and an inquest that concluded Kennedy had likely driven negligently, no charges were brought. In the end, while Kennedy escaped further legal repercussions, Chappaquiddick cast a long shadow over his career and the Kennedy family legacy. The incident led to a wave of public satire aimed at Kennedy, exemplified by a mock National Lampoon advertisement with the line, "If Ted Kennedy drove a Volkswagen, he'd be president today." This was a nod at speculation that perhaps it was Mary Jo that was driving the car, and the cars she was used to driving were far smaller than the car that she perhaps drove into Puka Pond. Now, following Ted's televised explanation, Kennedy maintained political support, but his national reputation and presidential hopes were deeply marred, notably during his 1980 campaign, when a CBS special revisited the Chappaquiddick incident with a critical lens. Associates of Kennedy faced a variety of consequences, from threats and backlash to silence on the matter, while the Dyke Bridge became a tourist spot, drawing thousands to Chappaquiddick. Despite this lasting shadow, Kennedy reportedly joked about the event in later years, a reflection, some believe, of his complex blend of remorse and resilience. To others, this calm demeanor highlights what is potentially a darker part of his character that leads many to speculate that, perhaps, there could be a conspiracy here, buried by the powers that be. So you've heard of Johnny Appleseed, but in reality he was born Jonathan Chapman in the town of Leominster, Massachusetts. The birthplace of America's most eccentric orchardist is marked, fittingly, by a stone on Johnny Appleseed Lane, where it all began, supposedly at least, in 1774. Tragically, here Johnny's mother passed away in childbirth, birthing his brother, and Johnny spent his early years under his father's guidance because of this. By 18, he and his little brother set out on the road to the Wild West, and by Wild West I mean Ohio, and the brothers kind of roamed nomadically until around 1805 when their dad and new family caught up with them. Here, Johnny's brother chose to split off from him, and Johnny, on the other hand, had orchards to plant and cider seeds to sow. Now, before becoming Johnny Appleseed, before fulfilling the prophecy, Chapman apprenticed under a certain Mr. Crawford, learning the fine art of orchardry, and at 26, Johnny started his first orchard in Licking County, Ohio, on Isaac Stadden's land. Forget the myth of random seed scattering. Johnny was all business, setting up nurseries, fencing them in, and appointing caretakers to look after the trees until he returned. I'm not necessarily implying he was doing this for profit, but he was certainly doing it in a way that wasn't haphazard. His little nurseries dotted Pennsylvania and Ohio, supplying apple trees by the acre, with Johnny popping by now and then to check on his leafy little friends. Around 1817, a bulletin out of Manchester, England, hailed Chapman as a missionary, spreading seeds and religious tracts. But religious zeal aside, Johnny was no fan of the megachurch lifestyle, and he famously called out a preacher once for living too lavishly, showing him what humility really looked like. Now, Johnny Appleseed passed away near Fort Wayne, Indiana, around 1846 or 1848, it's not entirely known, and in true folk hero style, he was calm and at peace, allegedly with zero fuss in his final days. He left behind a grand estate of over 1,200 acres, filled with apple nurseries, not to mention around 15,000 trees in total that he planted during his travels. Now, Chapman's trees weren't exactly producing sweet, lunchbox-ready apples, but those sour little fruits instead, ideal for cider. This was because Johnny wasn't actually planting apple cuttings like most apple farms, but instead, Johnny was planting apple seeds, hence his name Johnny Appleseed. These apple seeds don't generally grow apples that are sweet and ripe for eating, but instead, they generally grow sour apples that are pretty good for cider, as I said. And at a time when Ohioans downed an average of 30 gallons of hard cider per year in those days, I'm not even joking, you might want to start calling Johnny Appleseed Thirsty John instead. Now today, given the fact that you've probably heard of Johnny Appleseed, Johnny's legend lives on in poems, Disney tales, and a range of Midwest festivals dedicated to his apple-powered legacy. From Leominster to Fort Wayne, Indiana, his story is seeded in American history, just like his orchards. So, while my impression is that these acts went on far beyond 2014, in 2014 articles began to be posted by Boston news outlets describing a disturbing scene, a series of break-ins in the neighborhoods around Boston College, where a man known as the Tickler was being reported entering the homes of individuals, often students, and for the past 2 years, this individual, described as a 5'8" male that wore dark clothing, had been not just occasionally entering residences of students, but also watching them from outside of their windows while doing stuff, if you catch my drift. One account of this individual came from a student named Teddy Randall, who reported waking up in the middle of the night one October evening from a noise that sounded like one of his roommates had fallen down the stairs. Randall went out to check what was going on and actually found that someone had been touching his roommate's feet while he was sleeping. Other students in the area were experiencing a similar odd experience, awaking to either a figure at the end of their bed, or to their feet being tickled, or to that happening to their roommates. Of course, they always think this is a prank, that is until they realize the person tickling their feet is a stranger to them. From what I can tell, despite gaining entry, this individual never even stole anything. He simply tickled feet and watched people sleep. Friggin' creepy. Now, I need to be honest, I don't think this man was ever caught. There was actually another character caught, named the Brighton Stalker, that was following people home and entering their residences, and this individual is often confused with the Brighton Tickler on the internet. But from what I can tell, the descriptions of these individuals are totally separate. But luckily, the Brighton Stalker was apprehended about 2 years ago, at least if you believe the good folks of Reddit, that is. As of now, the Tickler remains at large though, so if you live in Brighton, while it seems this individual hasn't struck in about a decade, I'd still recommend keeping your doors locked and your feet beneath your covers. So this myth fits the profile of the conspiracy tier smiley face killer urban legend. In short, victims of this crime are typically well-to-do young males attending one of the many prestigious universities in the Boston area. And as the story goes, the killer picks his victims as they are making their way home from a night out, pushing them into a body of water where they carry the risk of drowning in the waterways of Boston. This myth is sort of obscure, but is frequently perpetuated on Reddit, and occasionally by news outlets that detail it. Now, these drownings themselves are very real. Since 2007, I was able to find at least 12 college-aged males have disappeared after a night out, in a fashion fitting this description, with most of these males ending up in a body of water deceased, usually the Charles River or Boston Harbor, but also nearby bodies of water like beaches up and down the coast and local reservoirs. This legend is actually so pervasive in the college communities in the Boston area that I myself was warned of becoming one of Boston's vanishing men by fellow graduate students and undergraduates that I taught. Most of these deaths occur during the winter, and this is why I start to get skeptical of this urban legend. I'm skeptical because, of course, drunken misadventure increases the odds of falling into a body of water. I mean, heck, I've done it, and these odds only increase when you fall into the water during the winter, which is when the majority of these folks that are considered Boston's vanishing men end up found in bodies of water. It's worth noting that when the body comes into contact with cold air or water, the body elicits something called a cold shock response. This is a gasp sort of reflex that results in inhalation, and if the head goes below water while this is occurring, this would cause someone to inadvertently breathe in water, resulting in drowning. Additionally, cold water carries the risk of decreased blood flow and hypothermia, all of which could decrease one's odds of getting out of the water successfully if they fell in. Now, this widespread skepticism I'm sharing doesn't decrease the prevalence of this myth in the area, and folks go so far as to also attribute deaths in the northern Merrimack River in Lowell and New Hampshire to this supposed killer as well. Personally, I don't entirely buy this urban legend. I'm open to it for sure, but I'm not entirely convinced. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe that someone's out there, either pushing or forcing young men into the cold waters of the Charles River in Boston? So I went back and forth on this one for a while, but I've decided that Dunkin Donuts is literally just a piece of Massachusetts folklore. When you live in this state, I kid you not, it is difficult to find yourself out of view of a Dunkin Donuts. Take, for instance, this experiment on Google Maps. First, I show you a pan over downtown Boston. There's lots of Dunkins, but if you zoom in and you search again, there's more flippin' Dunkins. And then you zoom in again, and you'll find that there are not only Dunkins, usually present every 400 to 500 feet, there are actually instances, such as at the intersection of Tremont and Court Street, where there are two friggin' Dunkins across the street from one another. When they say America runs on Dunkins, I think they literally mean that Dunkin is actually just buying as much land in America's urban centers as possible, and it scares me because I don't know what they're planning. But anyways, I've actually been hiking in Middlesex Fells, and if you go to the famous view of Boston on top of the large hill facing south, if you look closely enough in the winter when the leaves have fallen, you can see the sign at the front of the Commercial Street Dunkin in Malden. It is absolutely insane. You literally cannot escape Dunkin in this state. Even if you're out west and you're hiking the Appalachian Trail in Massachusetts, you're engrossed in nature. You can get to the top of a peak in the winter, and you look down and you see that down near a roadway just a mile to your west, there is a Dunkin in Williamstown. I kid you not, I've seen it. And among all of this Dunkin, there's a Dunkin that sort of stands out. It's a Dunkin along Highway 3A, or Southern Artery in Quincy, Massachusetts, that proudly proclaims its status as the mother of all Dunkin, the first Dunkin to ever exist. Here, this is not hyperbole, I twice had staff forget my order and tell me to leave the premises and stop harassing them for my wake-up raps on cold winter mornings in 2019. Perhaps it's this incredible customer service that keeps Americans, specifically those in Massachusetts, coming back to Dunkin again and again. In 1919, the North End neighborhood of Boston was primarily a working-class community, a stark departure from today's touristy part of town where you can find perfectly mediocre but incredibly overhyped pizza, overpriced cannolis that require a 25-minute wait to purchase, and plenty of fake Italian accents. At 529 Commercial Street, the Purity Distilling Company in the North End housed a massive molasses tank that stood 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter. This tank contained approximately 2.3 million gallons of molasses, which was used for alcohol production in another facility in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just about 2 miles away. This molasses was transferred daily from the Commercial Street tank to the Cambridge facility via a pipeline on site. Now, this day in question, where this incident occurred, was January 15th. On January 14th, the day prior, a delivery of molasses had been made. While they warmed this molasses to decrease its viscosity and make it easily flow into the larger tank, it cooled on the way there, and by the time it was in the Commercial Street tank, it was relatively chilly, and therefore sort of compressed. And on this day, they apparently filled the molasses tank to the brim. Now, herein lies the issue. The following day was unusually warm, and temperatures in Boston rose to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the previously cold molasses to expand inside of the relatively full tank. The resulting pressure became too much for the tank, which ultimately burst at around 12:30 p.m. The explosion released a wave of molasses that reached heights of 25 feet and moved at an estimated speed of 35 miles an hour. This wave caused significant destruction in the North End, knocking streetcars off of their tracks, crushing nearby buildings which were apparently budged off of their foundations, and inundating streets and homes with 2 to 3 feet of molasses, and at times an amount that was waist deep. Eyewitnesses reported that the sounds of the collapse were reminiscent to that of a freight train or a thunderclap. Now, tragically, while this is hilarious to envision, the disaster resulted in the deaths of 21 individuals, with many others being injured. The victims included both residents and workers who were caught in the onslaught of molasses. These individuals were not only drowned in the thick molasses, but were also pushed by the wave of the substance into the nearby Boston Harbor. Efforts to rescue those trapped were complicated too by the thickness of the molasses and the cold temperatures, making it difficult for people to extricate themselves and hard for people to help them out of it. Cadets from the USS Nantucket, a training ship docked nearby, were among the first responders, joined shortly thereafter by Boston police, Red Cross workers, and military personnel. Makeshift hospitals were set up to treat the injured, and rescue operations continued for 4 days, after which they sort of just gave up on the search and rescue. It's said that following this event, victims of the flood were found for months. Cleanup efforts involved fireboats that sprayed salt water to wash away the molasses, and crews using sand to absorb the remaining substance. The aftermath of the disaster left the harbor stained brown for months, and reports indicated that the remnants of molasses lingered in the area well into the summer, with, they say, every surface in Boston from the suburbs to the south and north, as well as the subway, being atrociously sticky. In the wake of the disaster, the Purity Distilling Company faced legal repercussions, a class action lawsuit, which resulted in compensation for the victims' families, amounting to about $7,000 per victim, a total of about $120,000 in today's currency. To this day, because of this event, some residents claim that on warm summer days, the North End can still carry a faint scent of molasses. Alright, here's one that's a bit off script for the list, but trust me, it's worth it. This isn't some quirky historical tidbit. It's a real experience that I had while I lived in Boston that you might just love if you're around. Quick background. I'm a massive fan of games, a solid brew, and I may or may not be a low-key game show junkie. Survivor, in particular, is my jam, and I'd always think while watching the show, man, if I could try those challenges, I'd crush it. But spoiler alert, they're way harder than they look. And I know that because of this rad group called Boston Underground Games, which brings actual Survivor-style challenges to life. Now, these folks don't mess around. They handcrafted some show-quality games, and they travel around the city setting these games up for the community to enjoy. In my experience, they went and set themselves up at Aeronaut Brewery, which is already one of my favorite breweries, and my friends and I got to live out our survivor dreams with a cold brewski in hand. It was honestly an absolute blast. Seriously, one of the most unique things I did in Boston, and I did a lot of unique things there. And I swear, this isn't an ad, I'm not getting paid to say this, I just had so much fun. The people running it were awesome, and the games were legit. If you're up for a wild experience, definitely check it out. Now, looking at their website, I can see they've got an event coming up on November 9th, so if you're seeing this in time, go ahead and hop on it. I can't recommend them enough. I've got their website on screen, and I pasted their link at the top of my description for this video. The journey of the Mapparium begins with the Church of Christ Scientist, an organization rooted in Lynn, Massachusetts. This Christian denomination, commonly known as Christian Science, views itself as a return to what it considers primitive Christianity. Adherents believe that reality is fundamentally spiritual, regarding the material world as an illusion. Consequently, they perceive disease as a mental error rather than a physical ailment, maintaining that prayer can heal the sick by correcting misguided beliefs about health. It's important to note that while many members rely on prayer for healing, they do not universally reject medicine or dental care, and largely comply with vaccination requirements. Now, in the 1930s, a member of this church, architect Chester Lindsay Churchill, was inspired to create a remarkable structure while working on the Christian Science Publishing Society in Boston. Notably influenced by the spinning globe in the lobby of the New York Daily News building, Churchill envisioned a giant stained glass globe that would reflect the political boundaries of the world as represented in a Rand McNally map from 1935. To bring this vision to life, 608 stained glass panels were meticulously crafted, and in June 1935, the Mapparium opened its doors to the public. However, this stained glass dome is not just an ordinary representation of the Earth. It offers a unique viewing experience. Visitors inside the Mapparium see a mirrored, concaved reflection of the world's countries, providing a strikingly different perspective on it. In addition to its visual impact, the Mapparium, perhaps more notably, is known for its remarkable acoustic properties. The hard spherical surfaces of the globe create an extraordinary effect. Even the softest whisper can be heard across the room. If two visitors stand on opposite sides of the bridge within the globe and speak quietly, their words can be transmitted clearly to each other, making it seem as though they are speaking directly into one another's ears. If I whispered to you, "It's free real estate," you'd hear it wherever you were in the room. Now, having visited the Mapparium, I can attest that it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Regardless of one's views on Christian Science, stepping inside of this artistic marvel can momentarily eclipse any preconceived notions. The visit is relatively inexpensive, and the tour focuses on the history of the Mapparium rather than any attempt to indoctrinate visitors. Instead, guests are invited to appreciate the stunning artistry and the extraordinary acoustics, making it a memorable stop for anyone interested in unique architectural and cultural experiences. In Salem, Massachusetts, a notable statue depicts a woman riding a broomstick, a tribute to the beloved television show Bewitched, and a marker of the city's transformation from a quaint town to a modern tourist destination. This bronze statue honors Elizabeth Montgomery, who played the show's lead character, Samantha Stevens, from 1964 to 1972. Bewitched at the time was a popular sitcom centered around a witch who married a mortal man and tried her best to adapt to a suburban lifestyle, showcasing the humorous conflicts that arose from her magical abilities. Originally set in California, the show's production faced a significant setback in 1970 when a fire damaged the California set during a period of declining ratings. In a creative pivot, the show's director decided to film a storyline in Salem, a place steeped in the historical context of witchcraft and witch hunts, and this shift culminated in Season 7, known as the Salem Saga, where Samantha travels back in time to the 17th century and faces a witchcraft trial herself. During this time, the cast and crew of Bewitched stayed at the historic Hawthorne Hotel, and they filmed various scenes in Gloucester and within the hotel's interiors, including a memorable moment in its elevators. The production featured iconic locations too, such as the Witch House, the House of Seven Gables, and Hawthorne Boulevard. This season not only revitalized the show's ratings, but also played a pivotal role in re-establishing Salem as a significant tourist destination, moving it beyond its historical context and into popular culture. However, the statue erected on July 15, 2005, standing 9 feet tall and showcasing Montgomery on a broom rested against a crested moon, has sparked mixed feelings among Salem's residents. While some view it as a lighthearted nod to the city's quirky history, others see it as a trivialization of the real tragedies that befell those accused of witchcraft in the past. Furthermore, contemporary Wiccans express concern that the statue perpetuates a stereotypical image of witchcraft that does not honor their beliefs and practices. This reaction reflects a broader dialogue about the intersection of history, representation, and commercial tourism. The unveiling of this statue was a collaboration between the city of Salem and TV Land, emphasizing the cultural impact of Bewitched and its role in shaping Salem's identity in the modern era. The statue stands not just as a piece of art, but as a reminder of the complexities of cultural heritage and the ways in which popular media can influence public perception and historical narratives. In Boston, one of the city's quirky roadside attractions, which is actually more next to a street than a road, is a 40-foot-tall milk bottle that now stands next to the Boston Children's Museum. This giant structure is part of a tradition of oversized landmarks, which also includes notable attractions like the giant teapots and coffee pots found throughout the country that we've covered before. Originally constructed in 1930 alongside a local store, the milk bottle was designed to sell homemade ice cream. Built from wood, it was large enough to hold an impressive 58,620 gallons of milk if it were real, and for several decades it served its purpose as a playful marketing gimmick, until it fell into abandonment during the 1960s. Now, in the late 1960s, Carol Schofield purchased the bottle for $2,500, envisioning transforming it into a summertime ice cream stand. Schofield, along with a friend from Hood Milk, successfully convinced H.P. Hood & Sons, a local dairy producer, to fund the renovation and relocation of the iconic structure. They originally tried to get it to move to City Hall Plaza, but the then mayor opposed that plan, prompting a search for a new home. And on April 20th, 1977, the bottle made its journey to the Boston Children's Museum, towed on a barge and escorted by 2 fireboats. It was met with cheers from onlookers, and once it reached shore, a crane carefully hoisted the bottle into place, marking the beginning of its new life as a beloved attraction that's really hard to miss. Today, the giant milk bottle still stands, serving ice cream and snacks to delighted children and families during the summer months. Visitors can enjoy a treat, while sometimes even catching a movie projected onto its towering surface. Now, personally, I have quite the story involving this milk bottle and the ice cream it sells too. But lucky for me, Blue Bikes tell no tales, even if they are a little bit upset about the turn of events that transpired. Maybe at 1 million subscribers, I'll tell you the tale of the Blue Bike that gave its life so that I may enjoy ice cream made from Hood milk. In Lynn, Massachusetts, an eccentric chapter of history unfolded thanks to one John Murray Spear, a former Universalist minister and fervent social reformer. Ordained in 1830, Spear had walked a well-worn path as a preacher until 1852, when he diverged dramatically from his Universalist congregation, and his new calling was spiritualism. And with this shift, he found himself in the company of a colorful crowd interested in equally peculiar pursuits. Spear's journey into the supernatural led him to a place called High Rock Hill, an elevated rocky parcel owned by a family named the Hutchinsons. The Hutchinsons were renowned singers with a taste for the paranormal, and they had cottages on the property that dotted the hillside, and they welcomed their odd new visitor, which was Spear. Spear and his companions fit right in here. They were offered lodging, including a shed on the property where Spear embarked on an ambitious and kind of otherworldly project. Now, in this weird pursuit, Spear was guided by what he claimed were spiritual entities known as the electricizers, who were none other than the spirits of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, among some others. And guided by them, Spear set out to build a machine that would supposedly change the world. According to the electricizers, this device would harness Earth's magnetic field and provide an endless, inexhaustible supply of power. It was to be no mere machine either, rather it would be animated as Spear described by a living spirit. This marvel was dubbed the New Motor, or New Motive Power. For 9 months, Spear poured his heart, soul, and $2,000, which was a lot then, into the project. A.E. Newton, an author who documented this spectacle, provided a detailed account of the machine's design. In his words, "Upon the center of an ordinary circular wood table, some 3 feet in diameter, were erected 2 metallic uprights, 6 or 8 inches apart between these, and reaching from one to the other near their tops was suspended on pivots a small steel shaft, which was crossed at its center by another shaft about 6 inches in length, on the extremities of which were suspended 2 steel balls enclosing magnets. The first named shaft was nicely fit with sockets at its extremities, so that the balls could revolve with little friction. Beneath these suspended balls, between the uprights and in the center of the table, was a sort of oval platform, formed of a peculiar combination of magnets and metal. Directly above this were suspended a number of zinc and copper plates, alternately arranged and said to correspond with the brain as an electric reservoir. These were supplied with lofty metallic conductors or attractors reaching upward. In combination with these principal parts were adjusted various metallic bars, plates, wires, magnets, insulation substances, peculiar chemical compounds, etc. At certain points around the circumference of the structure and connected with the center, small steel balls enclosing magnets were suspended, a metallic connection with the earth, both positive and negative, corresponding with the 2 lower limbs, right and left of the body, was also provided." Now, while assembling his bizarre contraption, one of Spear's followers, a particularly devoted woman, had a vision. In this revelation, she was proclaimed the Mary of a new dispensation, and she subsequently began experiencing the unmistakable symptoms of pregnancy. Interpreting this as a supernatural sign, Spear invited her to High Rock. According to the increasingly wild tale, she went into labor upon her arrival. Now, no physical child emerged from this miraculous labor, but they insisted that a spiritual child was born instead. And here's where things get truly outlandish. Those gathered at the scene claimed that Spear's machine began to emit subtle pulses and movements, a sort of mechanical heartbeat, if you will. For weeks, this woman stayed near the machine, nurturing it like a mother, with Spear and his followers ever present to impart energy to the device by touching it. They even claimed to lay their hands upon it for hours at a time, hoping to bring it life. Now, as time passed, it became harder to maintain the illusion that the machine was indeed alive, and the so-called mechanical messiah ceased to move altogether, assuming it had ever moved in the first place. Despite this glaring disappointment, the followers remained undeterred, though, convinced that the spirits must have simply gotten things wrong. Some of his other followers had a bit more skepticism and chalked all of this up to Spear's imagination. Still, Spears was hopeful that his brainchild might someday find an audience ready to understand its advanced nature, and Spear and his troupe tried to revive the new motor in Randolph, New York. But the local townsfolk were not inclined to welcome a mechanical messiah. In a dramatic conclusion to this saga, an angry mob actually ended up forming, deeply suspicious of this abnormal idea of a robot Jesus, and tore Robo-Jesus to pieces. And so Spear's dreams were shattered along with his machine. But undeterred, he continued to believe that one day humanity would be ready for the kind of technology that he had tried to introduce. Today, the site of Spear's unusual endeavor is known as High Rock Park. A stone tower built in 1904 now stands as a marker of this place where a strange attempt at perpetual motion failed in epic fashion. One of the original cottages, much like the one that probably played host to the almost Robo-Jesus, still stands, albeit notably not the same one that witnessed this curious birth. And as always, once again, physics won the day, with the second law of thermodynamics putting perpetual motion firmly in the realm of fantasy as usual. Have you ever heard of a Mooninite? If you're not familiar, you might not be alone. These characters hail from the animated show Aqua Teen Hunger Force, which aired on Adult Swim. The Mooninites are depicted as 2D aliens resembling video game sprites, simply described as being little beings from the moon. Now, why is this relevant to Massachusetts? Well, this connection comes from a bizarre incident that unfolded in Boston in January of 2007. As part of a national marketing campaign for the upcoming Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie, Peter Berdovsky and Sean Stevens decided to place small LED placards featuring the Mooninites in various locations across Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville. These devices were discreetly installed overnight and appeared in high-traffic areas like overpasses and train stations. Now, on January 31st at 8 a.m., a Boston resident spotted one of these peculiar devices on a stanchion supporting I-93 over Sullivan Station. Alarmed by its unfamiliarity, the individual reported it to the police, and this seemingly innocuous report set off a chain reaction that led to a significant police response, including bomb squads, fire trucks, ambulances, and a large contingent of officers. The authorities actually interpreted these battery-powered signs as potential explosive devices, leading to the shutdown of parts of I-93 and disruptions in the MBTA transit system. In a precautionary measure, they destroyed the placard and praised the citizen for alerting them. However, as the day progressed, more of these devices were discovered, one at the intersection of Stewart and Charles Street, another beneath the BU Bridge, and yet another at the Longfellow Bridge. Each one found prompted further closures and heightened tensions. Around this time, Berdovsky reportedly messaged some of his friends to keep the incident quiet, but 2 hours later, the police recognized the characters were from Aqua Teen Hunger Force and realized it was all a publicity stunt. At this juncture, it's important to acknowledge that while police response may have seemed excessive, the discovery of strange devices with shoddy wiring warranted caution, especially given the broader context. Earlier that day, real fake explosives had been found at 2 different locations in Boston, and what I mean by this is fake explosives that were meant to look like fake explosives. And also a suspected hazardous package was found in Washington, D.C. that emitted fumes and hospitalized some individuals. And this all led to the strong emergency response we saw in Boston. Now, there was significant backlash against the police in the aftermath of this, focused on the perception that the police were out of touch and unable to distinguish between a harmless marketing campaign and a genuine threat. While their reaction may have seemed harsh, it's essential to recognize the potential consequences of ignoring such a situation. If something had gone wrong, the same critics might have faulted law enforcement for not taking enough precautions. And personally, I stand in the camp of supporting the police on their decisions here. Ultimately, the marketing misfire resulted in a settlement of about $2 million between Turner Broadcasting and Interference Incorporated, with half of it going to the Department of Homeland Security and the other half going to the Boston Police Department. The executives at Cartoon Network faced fallout as well, with the general manager actually resigning shortly after this incident. Despite being just one of 10 cities involved in this campaign, Boston's response was notably intense and memorable, and to this day there's speculation that some of these strange devices may still be hidden in the city, waiting to be discovered, though hopefully this time with a bit more context and a little less panic. Massachusetts, my old home state, I sure do miss you, but it's been a treat learning even more about you, and I hope that I did your weird folklore justice. Additionally, folks, I'm sorry if this video was very Boston-centric. I promise when we move on to the ghosts and cryptids of Massachusetts, this will absolutely not be the case though. With this in mind, I just want to thank you for watching, and remind you that whether a man just approached you only to tell you his car's tire popped, or if you smelled a bit of molasses while you were walking by Mike's Pastries in the North End, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.